That morning, I noticed something strange happening near the power pole beside my property. Several utility trucks had arrived without anyone warning me. At first, I thought it was routine maintenance. I had no idea the entire neighborhood was about to be affected. I walked closer and saw a worker preparing to cut the pole. I immediately asked what was going on. Nobody seemed interested in giving me a straight answer. Then I noticed the HOA representative standing nearby. I asked the HOA woman why they were touching the power pole. She told me the work had been approved as part of a neighborhood improvement project. But there was one problem. Nobody had told me my property was involved. She said the pole was old and needed to be replaced. I asked why they couldn't simply replace it properly. She avoided the question and said the HOA had already coordinated everything. That answer didn't sit right with me. Then I noticed an engineer examining the pole. He wasn't acting like this was a simple replacement. He kept checking the surrounding equipment and asking the workers questions. Something clearly wasn't going according to plan. The engineer kept looking at the electrical connections. He checked the pole, then the cables, then the service equipment. Finally, he stepped back and stared at the setup. His expression told me something was wrong. The engineer finally called the HOA representative over. He showed her something on the plans. She looked at the pole, then at the document. Her confident expression began to disappear. The engineer explained that the pole wasn't isolated. It was connected to the electrical system, serving a huge portion of the neighborhood. If they removed it without proper coordination, the consequences could be serious. I asked the obvious question, how could the HOA approve this without checking the electrical impact? She didn't have an answer. Instead, she kept looking toward the engineer. The engineer finally warned them. He said the power system needed to be handled carefully before the pole was removed. Otherwise, the neighborhood could lose service. Nobody seemed prepared for what he was suggesting. Despite the warning, preparations continued. Trucks kept arriving, and workers started setting up around the pole. I could feel something going very wrong. The whole operation looked far bigger than a simple repair. The technicians started checking the lines one by one. She discovered that several connections were more complicated than expected. The engineer immediately told everyone to slow down. I stood there watching everything unfold. More trucks had arrived than I had ever seen on our street. Something that started as one pole had turned into a major utility operation. The engineer stopped the crew again. He said they needed confirmation before cutting anything. The HOA representative looked confused. Then the engineer asked who had authorized the work order. She suddenly looked completely caught off guard. The engineer repeated the question. Who had approved the specific work order? Nobody seemed willing to answer. The engineer and technician went through the work documents again. They checked the service information and the neighborhood connections. I could tell they were trying to understand how the project had reached this point. Then the engineer gave the crew a clear instruction. Stop. Nobody was going to touch the pole until the electrical system was verified. That was the moment I realized his warning had been serious from the beginning. The HOA representative finally came over to speak with me. Her tone was completely different now. She wasn't acting confident anymore. She knew the situation had become much more serious than expected. The engineer explained what could happen if the wrong connection was interrupted. The HOA finally understood that this wasn't just a property issue. One mistake could affect hundreds of homes, and time was running out. The engineer had warned them not to rush the job, but the HOA had already set everything in motion. Before dinner, one decision would leave homes across the neighborhood without power, and everyone would finally understand why he had warned them.